Well, this is awkward. Alex Scott, one of the faces of the BBC's new diversity drive, was shocked to discover that her ancestor owned slaves. With some doubting her presenting ability, Scott was nevertheless chosen to replace Dan Walker as the host of the Football Focus show earlier this year. Apparently this annoyed gammons, a leftist slur for working class people, but critics claimed it was an example of politically correct BBC box ticking. Well, this isn't politically correct. During her appearance on Ancestry show Who Do You Think You Are, Scott began crying after discovering her Jamaican ancestor owned slaves in the 1820s. Her 4 times great-grandfather, Robert Francis Coombs, who was black, owned 26 slaves. A historian on the show had to explain to Alex that it wasn't unusual for black people to own slaves. In terms of explaining my emotion behind it, I suppose it goes against everything that I stand for, who I am, said Scott. I really did believe I'd be learning about my family as slaves, not the other side as the slave owners. Not shocking to learn that Scott is an ardent supporter of Black Lives Matter. Shame her great-grandfather didn't think so. But does this mean that Alex Scott is to blame or needs to apologise for the sins of her ancestors? Absolutely not. But neither does anyone else. How do you think the slaves were rounded up and sold in the first place? Not by white Europeans, but by black African tribal rulers. In 2009, the Civil Rights Congress of Nigeria even wrote to tribal chiefs saying, quote, "We cannot continue to blame the white men, as Africans, particularly the traditional rulers, are not blameless." Furthermore, virtually every major empire, ethnicity, and civilization practiced slavery. People are still genuinely dumb enough to think that only white people own slaves, when everyone owned slaves. Go look at a list of where modern slavery still exists. You're not going to find many white countries on it. Under the Barbary slave trade, over 1 million white Europeans were enslaved by Middle Eastern and North African pirates. Muslims from Algeria, Tunisia and Morocco travelled as far north as Iceland to raid coastal towns and kidnap white slaves. Why isn't that being taught in schools? Why are only certain statues being torn down by the mob? Why is the modern debate around colonialism, slavery and reparations habitually fixated around why only white people need to apologise for the sins of their ancestors? We know why. Because the only institutionalized form of racism that is still acceptable, and in fact encouraged, in the culture, in media, in schooling, in academia, from the government, is that directed towards white people. So yes, black people own slaves, Middle Easterners own slaves, Chinese people own slaves, everyone owns slaves. But kids growing up and students in universities being indoctrinated to hate themselves have no idea whatsoever that that's a historical fact. To get exclusive content, early access, behind-the-scenes stuff, and to personally interact with me, please sign up for my community at pauljosephwatson.locals.com. Link in description, and thank you for your generous support.
When listeners call into the show and thank me for all I've done, I always stop them and I say, thank you for what you've done. Thank you for keeping InfoWars on the air. Thank you for praying for us. And thank you for spreading the word. If all of you will simply go to InfoWarsStore.com and get a privacy pocket for your iPhone or Droid, it will teach you and others that these things are surveilling you. It will remind you every day, like it does me and my family, and it will protect where you go and what you do. Not because you've done something wrong, but because the big telecoms, big tech, and the globalists are predatory and are evil. And in this surveillance state, we need to more and more start doing everything we can to mitigate the criminal activity they're involved in. These are the highest quality, highest ratings. They're available at InfoWarsStore.com in 4 different colors, and they are only $19.95. The exact same pocket is sold for $24.95 or even $29.95 everywhere. They're available right now for $19.95, and they fund the InfoWar. Please take action today, protect your privacy, and fund the InfoWar.